All right, I'd like to invite our 4 panelists to come up and sit in any one of these chairs. It's not musical chairs. There are 4 people and 4 chairs. No. Whatever looks comfortable, Bobby. I've forgotten how long. How long do we have on this panel?
Yeah, I want to go 2:55.
Until when?
2:55.
2:55. All right. So for the next roughly 40 minutes, we're going to benefit from the wisdom and experience of our distinguished panel members. One of whom you've heard from already a bit, Leo Ryder, and the others who will introduce as we go along. Now, I have a bunch of questions, but my questions are not important. What's important are your questions. So I'm hoping that you're going to ask a lot of questions from the audience. What I'll do is ask one question of each, just to get things rolling, of each of our panelists, and give a brief introduction as I do that, and then we'll go from there. So we'll start with Leo first, since people have already been introduced to him and since he's here. And my first question for you, Leo, is what advice do you have for a graduate student or for somebody that's young in their career who has the idea that they want to start a company?
Find a mentor. I mean, I just cannot say that enough. When we're children, we don't listen to our parents. We make mistakes. We get burned. When we're a little bit older, if we can humble ourselves and kind of open our minds a bit, and it's really hard to do when you're in your early 20s. I mean, it was hard for me. But once you accept that, hey, this person already made all those mistakes, and they're going to save me years of getting burned. And you still fight it because you're young and cocky and all this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's a great thing to have. And I wish I had a magic formula for finding a mentor. I was very lucky, like I said in my presentation. But if there's anybody who you look up to who has experience, most people will be more than happy to share that with you if you ask.
Great. Next question.
Can I pitch
Oh
my
yeah,
question
please,
onto
go
that?
ahead, follow him.
Because I think that's incredibly important. I think that's massively important. Within part of doing something new and being an innovator and disruptor is mixing things up and ignoring that advice. And everyone's telling you you're wrong, you're going ahead and doing it anyway. And how do you get the balance right between asking for advice and not realizing that you're not mad?
Well, I mean, I think that's.
How do you tell the difference is the key question.
Yeah. I think that's the difference between a mentor and a parent, right, or a teacher. I mean, a teacher or a parent will tell you, here, in most cases, here's how you do it, and don't, because I know more than you do. Where a mentor is more kind of a combination of teacher, parent, and friend, right? And it's just somebody who's like you, but has way more experience. And I think a good mentor will give you their experience rather than just kind of tell you lessons. They'll say, well, when I did this, here's what happened. And then at the end of the day, a good mentor will also let you burn yourself and then kind of, not rub it in, but kind of use that as a teaching experience as well. So it's, you have to kind of feel that out.
And I guess I would add to that you often want to ask for the answer to a mentor. Say, what is the answer to this question? And oftentimes it's more like, a good mentor is more like good therapy, that it sort of elicits the answer from you. It's the way you approach the problem as opposed to, this is going to be the answer to your problem. And I think the right mentor has made enough mistakes to be able to lead you to that. So if you get somebody that just gives you a direct answer that turns you off and turns your stomach, chances are maybe that's not if it's based on a technology you're working on, chances are that's not the right mentor. But if he or she asks a leading question, talking about a gambit or competitors, then maybe it's more of a fit.
So it's kind of like Shaheen's just said, it's the difference between a mentor and a tormentor.
I heard a really funny story one time that, sorry to take up too much of your time, but a guy who I was working with who was telling me about his mentor, and apparently this guy had made hundreds of millions of dollars selling something. And they went, and then he retired, right? So they go out to, to lunch or dinner or whatever, at a super expensive restaurant. And at the end of the, of course, the guy that I was talking to is expecting his mentor to pick up the check. And he slides him the check, and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm on fixed income, you're not. So that was one of those kind of tough love lessons that, that I thought it was pretty funny.
I think there's still one more thing to think about too. It's, if you're asking, is my technology, is my new creation fit well in the industry? Is it a good idea? That's probably the wrong question. I think the mentor probably can't help you with that because you're the one that really knows what you're doing anyway. But he can help you with other things like what's the best way to get funding, or how should I set up my books so that I can follow the tax laws and do things correctly, or how should I go about selling? Should I do it myself or should I hire somebody? Those are the kinds of things I think you could ask from a mentor. But is this a good technology, and how's it going to fit, and who should I maybe probe into? He's not going to know that as well as you are.
And almost better, a mentor can help you come up with those questions.
True.
Any more follow-on to this thread? Well, the next question is for Stephen Wu, who is a VP and inventor from Rambus. And he's also a salesman. He's got something that he wants to sell us today in terms of memory technology, or at least demonstrate. And Stephen, you've worked in aerospace and technology industries. You've worked in areas ranging from neural nets running on Cray supercomputers to overall strategy, marketing and business development efforts for new solutions and markets for high-performance memory. Now, in your early career, you were using Cray supercomputers for neural net applications. Did you get the HPC bug at that time, and perhaps also the memory bandwidth bug?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was fascinated by it when I first programmed on supercomputers, and I was lucky I got a chance to program on a pretty wide range back then, and had great supportive management. My first boss was probably the best mentor I've ever had. And so one kind of comment I wanted to add about this whole thing about mentors is, it's true from a technical standpoint, I didn't know more about the technology I was working on, but what he really taught me was how the rules of the game. So that was the thing that it took a long time for me to understand. Why exactly does the industry work this way? Why exactly does a business work this way? And those are things he was able to impart to me very quickly. It would have taken me much more time to figure those things out. And so just, really what I think back to this particular mentor was his imparting of the knowledge of the rules of the game. And that's where I really began to understand what questions I should ask in order to figure out how to break them or how to find a competitive advantage.
And just to follow on to that, Rambus, by the nature of its business model, seems like an entrepreneurial playground. Would you agree with that statement?
Playground seems a little bit too, too free and easy, but it is definitely much more in that direction. There's a really good reason why. So the vast majority of our revenue comes from licensing arrangements, and they're actually very long in duration. So over, as of I think three years ago, if you asked me what our revenue was going to look like, we had a guaranteed revenue of $1 billion over 10 years. And so when you have that kind of guaranteed revenue, it actually allows you to do things like be very forward-looking and to commit revenue or commit capital to investigate new ideas. And so one of the things we're able to do, and so this is part of why I brought this, is we're showing this here at Supercomputing, is we are now working on an effort to build a hardware and software system to improve analytics. And so like big data and graph analytics, those types of things. And so this was started as an internal kind of startup effort. And so over the last year and a half, we've sent off a team of hardware and software designers to build, there's an FPGA on here as well, it's really the hardware system and the software and the bit files around putting this kind of thing together. So I don't want to take up a lot of time explaining what it is, but it was really run like an internal startup. And so it was a kind of a fascinating experience to do that. If anyone's interested in hearing a little bit more, you can talk to me afterwards or actually demoing it. We can give you a demo too.
It would be interesting to hear what your thoughts are around building a partner ecosystem around this enabling technology.
Yeah, that's probably a 2-hour talk by itself.
Just
but
philosophy.
But the general philosophy is there's definitely a part of it where you're trying to leverage what's already there in the ecosystem. It's what people are familiar with, and it's hard to move the mountain. And there's definitely a part of it where you're trying to figure out the parts that are not being served, how best do you slot those in the lowest friction way? I mean, it's not, I don't think it's rocket science from that standpoint, but those are the types of questions we ask ourselves every day.
Any questions from Stephen at this point? All for Bobby. Yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's a lot of excitement in the industry about big data and analytics, right? And one of the things that I'm curious is if you look at what's a lot of that's doing is they're doing statistical analysis. And they're trying to do what ifs, right? But the big problem with that is that your statistical models are often wrong. So you can't do predictive analysis that way. Now, the other thing is that a lot of the vendors in supercomputing these days are really excited by big data. And, pretty much everybody is, right? But models that we know work are based on simulating physics and numerically solving these physical models, right? Given the fact that there's so much emphasis going on big data, and we know that those models aren't really that good outside of the box, right? Why is there such an incredible emphasis there versus in building models much more rapidly and making that process of building those models over here? For business operations, I'm not saying for, statistics is only good for certain things, right?
Right. Oh, well, yeah.
But it's the hammer we have. We're gonna use it on everything we think might look like a nail.
I think there's an awful lot to your point. I think this is, I think this needs to be listened to, because there's, I think largely big data and a lot of analytics that's picking up. It's like, it's a new toy, right? It's a new hammer, people are looking for nails. And an awful lot of stuff that is being done. I think there's a massive lost opportunity here with smart cities and sensors and everything else. They're doing like very simplistic statistical predictive modeling and stuff that's really trivial stuff. And like there's always been inversion going on where people are using hard physics models to do proper inversion data dissemination and so forth. People are ignoring that because it's kind of hard. And people keep talking about there's going to be a fusion between HPC and big data at some point. And I think that's true, but maybe not for the reason that people think. I think once people get bored of this hammer, they'll actually start going back and looking at physics models and start fusing the two.
So,
Good, I think we want to.
One other point.
Yes, quickly, please.
Really quickly, right? This is hard evidence, right? About 10 years ago, my wife's stepmom passed out in a sauna. The cardiologist, we were in a room, the cardiologist basically said, pull the plug, she's gonna either die or come out with the medical capacity of a 4-year-old. She based it on a statistical model. I asked the question is, what's your air bound? Oh, we've taken that into account. 3 days later, she came out of the coma. They were doing the statistical analysis based on the chemical concentrations of stroke patients, right? Physically based models are what's important. If all the major companies put all of their IP and their invention, their creativity in that, how do you know it's not noise? That's my question.
Okay. We'll table that for the moment, because it takes us down a different path.
But it's an opportunity for startups.
It is an opportunity, so people think about that. So Bobby Hazard is CEO at MPT, which is Massively Parallel Technologies. And Bobby, you've been in a number of startups in the hardware and software spaces, as well as with some very large systems vendors. And you've been in senior sales roles, business leadership, general manager roles, dealing with billion-dollar businesses. And now you're a CEO role at a software startup. You've had experience with entrants and with exits, and you've seen stuff, by which I mean storms, unexpected events, and challenges, and I'm being polite in my choice of words. So the question to you is, what inspired you to take on a CEO role for an ambitious software startup with touch points to HPC, such as cloud-based collaborative development and the automated parallelization capability?
That's a good question. I think I evolved into it, actually. It's been very interesting. But talking about the disasters that can happen and the good things that can happen, there's been a lot of opportunity for learning here. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is that all founders don't agree. And when founders don't agree, it can make havoc for the rest of the organization. I was not a founder in this company that I'm in. There are 3 founders, one of which has been removed. And he actually was the technologist. So it's been a very interesting ride, and my job is to take what's remaining of the technology and make something out of it and get it to market. So it's a very different sort of approach to business. We've been probably the longest run ever in being a startup. I think this is our 16th year. So it's very interesting. So the most important thing is really finding the right kind of funding and the right kind of people that you're working with. One of the things that was said earlier, Dan brought it up, was the combination of people is very important, and the combination of job allocations is very important, because without that, we really are setting ourselves up.
Can I ask?
Please.
So you said something really important that you may want to make sure everyone understands. Being a founder is not an entitlement to have permanent sort of influence in a company, right? So
That's right.
there's still accountability, and sometimes the business has to move in different directions. So I think to young founders, that's something that's probably pretty important to understand.
It definitely is a vision with this particular group. There was one who is a CFO type, one who is the technologist, and one who was heavily into finance and actually did all the money raising. But the combination was very good from a people standpoint, but terrible when you get past a certain point at being a technologist. You actually need to turn that technology into a real product like this one. And if you can't get from an idea to something that's concrete, you will never make money. And that's what happened with this particular founder. It had to be removed in order to get past that.
So the follow-up here is just to elaborate a bit on that, is how do you maintain the vision while building the revenue with shippable product and get up that S-curve?
You give everybody the vision, so everybody knows where you're marching to, and make sure everybody's in line with that. And you clean up the edges. You know, don't let these pet projects start up. You keep everybody on their focused march. And we've been able to do that, ready to go to market now after 2 years of finally cleaning up the edges and getting things going. But it's been difficult, so it's a hard lesson to learn. One you don't want to tackle really if you can avoid it. If the founder knows that his strength is creative technology, creative ideas, finding new niches in the market, then that's great, and that's what that founder should continue to do. It sounds like you've got a little think tank inside your organization that continues to come up with new ideas, which is the perfect solution. But if you then hand that person to be the VP of engineering and to organize the structural process of getting something else, it doesn't work. They just don't have that skill set, usually.
Well, you've triggered a thought in my mind about common history. InCube, the founder, it got bought out, the founder went off eventually. Cray, Seymour eventually moved on. You know, it seems to be more the norm in my experience than the exception. But there are times for founders, and it's a rare founder that passes that baton into the next.
Well, companies change tremendously.
Right.
I mean, it's,
You need to
Right, absolutely.
have it grow.
And I guess I would just add that founders tend to love technology a lot more than they love people.
I can vouch for that, those two things too.
Again and again, and if you're a founder, we had some young people here, I'm a great programmer, I want to start a company. You sort of have to plan for that, which is unless you're going to set out a path on social development, tolerance, and everything else you have to deal with, you should plan for being ready to take a backseat role at some point. Unless you end up developing a different direction, as I guess all of us has, which is to learn to love people and their differences, and marketing and everything that comes in between, of which you probably during your academic career developed a healthy distrust of. So you got to learn to love the interaction.
So this is Philip Mucci, and I don't know if that was a biographical statement you were making, Phil. But you're founder of a software services company centered around performance optimization, data analytics, and even advisory services around technology acquisition strategy. The company name is Minimal Metrics. You're small, you're close to your customers' core processes, you're entrepreneurial by temperament and by necessity. how did you first become part of the HPC industry?
That bio makes it sound like I don't struggle to pay my mortgage every month. It's humbling to be on this committee, by the way, because it really, as we describe it, every month we're walking the plank. But I came to this industry first as an intern at Thinking Machines, if anybody out there, there's a few people that are that old. And growing up in Cambridge, I was around there, and being indecisive but very interested in science, it led to what's the easiest way I can learn as much about as many sciences as possible, and that was scientific computing. And that led to a master's degree with Jack Ngara, and I mean, that is definitely a springboard for most people. So that's where it ended up, and then always having been instinctively a road less traveled person, either by nature or nurture, I never could quite imagine myself in a more traditional role. So I started consulting in grad school and with periodic stints. And over time, I realized I wanted to build a brand instead of an individual. And sadly, we've been much more I was much more successful as an individual as building a brand, but that's part of the process. So I think that's really how I came. But fundamentally, it came from a love of science and technology. But what's kept me in the entrepreneurial spirit goes back to the last point, which is a love of working with people and working with the right people.
And just to elaborate on this a bit, you've got a small startup. You've chosen not to work for a large organization, although you could. And instead, you're pursuing an organic growth strategy. You're not, I guess, looking at venture funding right now. So what's good about this, and what's difficult about organic growth?
I actually would honestly say I'm 44 years old, and I would say there's not much that's good about this strategy, honestly. The original, for the current plan for the company was to use our existing and future contracts to bootstrap development in the verticals that we were working in. Sounds perfect, right? Until you realize that most really good people in our industry need to get paid $100, $125 an hour to stick around. There's very little margins you can make to even get a half-decent engineer on that. So this is the growth curve we have. So the follow-on question I think would be, how do you keep people or how do you get people? And often it's a byproduct of, I'm sort of the rebound boyfriend, right? That when somebody comes out of an organization and they have this interest of being entrepreneurial and they want to do something different, but they're not quite sure where to go, and they don't just want to hop into a startup, because then you just become an employee again, except you work harder and get paid less. But they want to be involved, and I think it really is a personality match. And I think people look for those qualities in an individual, and I look for those qualities in somebody else. Rahul is here with us today, and he found me through a connection, a good friend at Google through his advisor, and but that was we shared a very similar spirit and a sense that we're ready to struggle. But it is a very tough problem, and we constantly have to compete with people who they have. I didn't come off a huge company budget, so as a result, there's not much padding. So we have a hard time competing with people that may just offshore all the development or things like that. So it is a struggle. My advice would actually be to go the school of hard knocks and take maybe a job at a bigger company and give yourself some padding and do it earlier, not later, not when you're 44 and you have a house or a mortgage or a wife or a husband or kids or whatever it may be. It becomes extremely difficult. And even, I've moved off to, a corner of the country in order to make this work, because I can't be here in Austin and continue to do and still grow the business. And that's not necessarily the most, I love it, but it's definitely not for everybody. And I think there's an easier path to it. And should I had it to do over again, I think I would probably pursue a more natural plan. And part of the reasons I'm here today is to pursue that plan and talk to some of you about investments and everything.
Okay.
So.
Great. I'd like to open up to the audience. You must have some more questions at this point from what you've heard.
Question.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So how do you go about establishing credibility first in the initial rounds of funding, especially whenever you don't really have one? I mean, you mentioned about how it's important that the original founders go out and try to do the original pitches, original sales, but how do you establish that credibility, especially in the industry where there's so many PhDs and researchers who are very educated and have seen a lot of things.
Go ahead.
I mean, I could take a stab at it, that, academia does give you a nice platform to establish credibility. And writing papers and attending conferences is one of the few mechanisms we have to get noticed. I mean, my business wouldn't exist if it wasn't for that. I'm not, other than that, there's internships and other aspects by which you can begin to network. But it's, I don't think you're implicitly delivered credibility. It helps where you go to school and things, of course, but the other way is to lead with a demo. I went to a conference in San Francisco the other day, and actually the famous fellow from Austin was like, just build it yourself and show it to people. So you can always lead with technology, and that in and of itself comes with credibility, but it takes the right kind of investor to see that for what it is rather than to see you as a 24-year-old or something. They can look at it and say, this is a great idea. Not a very helpful answer, but.
Leo, do you want to chime in? Because you established credibility as being the youngest of several co-founders.
Well, but I built a product, so that kind of helped. But I would say, don't overpromise. Find actual pain. I mean, if you're, this is maybe outside of academia, right? But if you're looking at the private sector, find something that people, maybe you have to adapt your idea slightly, but something that's really painful to people, that's a gap, right? And solve the problem and show it to them and say, look, I'm just solving this problem. I'm not like, we heard before the ABC, F, right? I wouldn't go as far as recommending other solutions personally, that's just not my style, but to say, look, this is, for these 3 things, this will do it for you. Not for these other 20 things, maybe you go find other solutions. But, if you don't find the pain, you don't want to solve a problem that's not actually there, or that's not painful enough for people to pay money for it. And then once you show them that it's solved, and that it works, and that it's, again, deployment trumps functionality, right? I mean, that establishes credibility.
Bobby, you come at it from the other side. You're evaluating people's credibility. Right, so how do you do that? How do you look at people coming to you that?
We're in a really good place. We're actually sitting in the Innovation Center on Arizona State University's campus at SkySong. And so we've had the benefit of being able to hire a lot of students who are in their master's program or PhD program. So I've been able to get some cheap technology labor because the university controls the pricing. I don't have an option, which is great. And it's great for them. They get great exposure to learn how to work in an organization. So at times we've had 27, 30 students for a semester. Now the disadvantage is sometimes they're turning over, right, and leave, and you don't get to keep people as long as you'd like, but that does really help. But I think you do have to evaluate the individual carefully, not only what they know, but how they fit in. Because it's the people skills that are really important as well as the work skills. If the guy sits in the back room and works well by himself, but never comes out, never talks to anybody else, never collaborates well, at some point the product will fall apart because the pieces aren't cohesive. So it's really important to see teamwork and people who are willing to participate that way.
I'd just like to reinforce that point about finding the pain point, and not finding the pain point, then going out with, well, here's some solutions I could provide, that actually providing it and demonstrating it, and then going to as many, once you're sure of what that pain point is and that it's widely dispersed, that there's a lot of people having that pain, show it to anybody you can get to stand still long enough to watch it over and over and over. And the thing is, once something is yours and it came out of, I don't want to say it came out of you because that sounds a little spooky and creepy, but once it's something that's come out of your head, you've made it solid, you're going to find all of the impetus to sell it and to sell everybody you run into on it coming out of yourself.
Yeah, but what if your minimal viable product is not something that you can do yourself? How do you establish, how do you get past that first hurdle where we actually need to find some help?
Why is it minimally valuable?
Minimally viable.
Minimal viable.
Yeah.
If I can, credibility comes in many different forms. As an angel investor, we'll look at different things. A prototype is helpful, but maybe you don't have one, like you said, maybe that's a big thing to do. If you're in the storage industry, I'm gonna look at something like, okay, you're a brand new person, you're a student, but if you have someone on your board of directors or as your mentor, you know, if you can call Gary Greider or Brent Gorda or somebody's on your side as a person, a veteran of the storage industry, that will mean a lot. Maybe you're going for a utility patent, that will have a lot. Do you have purchase orders? Do you have people interested? There are all kinds of different things that you can look at, so it's not just, you know, if I can touch and feel a prototype, that's wonderful, but there are other things.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to add to that is, you know, there's having like technical vision and having good ideas and all that, but there's the other half of it, which is the execution. I mean, you really have to do what you say you're going to do when you said you were going to do it. I mean, that part is often, I think, lost, but it's one of the most important things that I think sets people apart in their credibility. And so it goes into not overpromising. It goes into really having enough of a coherent vision about what you have to do to move things forward. If you can do those things really, you know, it sounds kind of minor, but those things really set people apart. And it's pretty easy to tell when someone kind of has a history of doing this type of thing. You can easily talk to people. If you're a student, and people will come and talk to your advisor, right? And they'll talk to other people on your committee. In fact, talk to other students from your research group. So your reputation is really being set by the things that you're doing right now and that you've been doing the last 10 years.
And there was a really good point, and that's great, earlier about, you know, get your elevator pitch down in 4 words. I would argue if it's your first venture, let's say, and your vision is to transform the way that people use, you know, whatever, it's probably a little broad. You know, just maybe try to find out, okay, well, what is the one piece that's really differentiated? And maybe that is something you can do by yourself. And I would suggest to young technical people that, you know, always look, you know, try to build small teams. You know, and I would, even as you get bigger, you know, you mentioned the cost of developers and so forth. Small teams with the right leadership and the right chemistry are, in my experience, either just as productive, if not more productive, than large teams where people are kind of trying to figure out what to do. So if you can do it with 1 or 2 people and you've got your vision down to something small enough, and then you could always add to it, right? But don't start with like the boil the ocean vision and then figure out, well, I need 100 people to build it, right? I mean, that's probably, that you can probably reduce it, I guess is the point. Yeah.
Let me just add one thing though, and I agree 100%, but that it sounds like you have an idea stewing and you're like, okay, it's a little bit bigger than me. This will be the first sale you will ever make before a customer will be to your first partner or your first engineer or to a buddy or somebody in a meetup group that is going to come with you. And you should expect that to fail a number of times as well until you find the right person or the right pitch or some combination. And that goes back to the circle of you really got to love people or figure out how to love them in the process. But if you treat it like that, and you can convey and that's the first time I saw you smile, so I appreciate that. you can appreciate, that's going to be a big part of it, because it really is your first sale, because all you have to offer, you have no money, you have an idea, all you have to offer is yourself. And at the end of the day, somebody's just got to want to work with you. Man, this guy's either crazy or brilliant, I don't know, but I'm going to go for it. And you know, there's not much else left when you're just in the beginning, right?
Can I buy from people?
Yes, please.
And you're here, so we are trying to build a community to be able to provide help. And as we grow, we will be able to have people who would be on the lookout. And right, so.
More questions? We've got
No, I
a few
have a
more
question,
minutes.
actually,
You have a
before I-
question.
Funding. Have any of you considered a funding agency to get funding from? A grant or other ways of?
Well,
Phil, that's for you.
Well, the last 2 years, we endeavored the SBIR route. Or do people know what SBIRs are as a whole?
You probably want to do a quickie on it.
Okay, real quickly, the various branches of government put out calls, the Small Business Innovation Research Grants. And they come in a small chunk, a big chunk, and an unlimited chunk. And the idea is this is supposed to jumpstart businesses like HPC, businesses that don't have a traditional attractive model to VCs or angels. It may be lower margins, everything else. But I've talked to a couple people who are successful in this business and like, oh, we went 0 for 8 on our first SBIRs and things like that. So I would just say that if you're going the SBIR route, it helps if you're faculty. I know a lot of people who are they're joint faculty and then they're kind of SBIR factories on the side. I do know there are other avenues through the government, eager grants and STAR grants and a whole bunch of other things that are possible. But that's all I can offer so far. We're over 3, we got one in the pipe, and we're gonna keep swinging at that pitch. But that's all I can offer there.
Yeah, so in previous company, yeah, I've worked on like DARPA contracts and grants and things like that, yeah, as a way to kind of get some of our technologies on the ground.
But you have to be careful because you want to make sure that it ends up being your technology and not the government's technology because they put money in it, so just a word of caution. We've also done the SBIRs, but we're privately funded, and it's been a very interesting ride because we take money, instead of taking money in chunks, which is the normal way that people go out and talk to a venture capitalist and end up getting $10 million, and then burning through the $10 million and going for more, a sort of phased approach. We actually take money monthly. So we make a contract with the VC that this is the amount we're going to need, this is our budget for the year. They agree to that, we agree to that, and then we pull monthly. So the difference is that we're not burning through so much of our own capital, and we're not giving away stock as quickly that way. So it's been a little interesting, different from anything I've ever seen before in the industry, but it certainly has been more helpful because we haven't had to go assume a large debt that we may or may not need all up. We don't really know, can't predict.
Does that ever cause cash flow problems for you short term, or is it somewhat regular?
The only cash flow problem would be if they can't produce, couldn't fund us accordingly, but otherwise, we have a monthly agreement. I know exactly how much I'm gonna need for the year. I know when I'm gonna hire, I've already projected, when I'm gonna get revenue, et cetera.
We have time for 1 or 2 more before we close out. Yes?
I'm just curious, and I don't think this is necessarily even in the context of startups, but from your position, what are trends or technologies or just anything in that along those lines that you're looking at, you're keeping your eye on, that you find interesting? Expansive question.
Stephen, how do you anticipate the market? You've got to do this all the time and stay ahead of the market trends and develop technology that meets where the market's going to be a couple of years down the road.
It's kind of this joke. We have this magic 8 ball on somebody's desk, but no, it's really there's a lot of reading and talking to people. Good old fashioned getting out there and just talking to people. I mean, you have to think about a way to kind of multiply your own individual effort, and the best way to do that is to come to places like these conferences, right, where there's a ton of smart people who don't work for your company. That see a wide range of problems that you will never see, right? So I'd say that's a really big part of it, and I think really exercising the relationships you have with existing customers is extremely important because, there's no one who's going to be more honest with you than a customer who's facing a crisis, right? They will not mince words, and they will tell you right off the bat what the most important things are. So I think you get those kinds of relationships because you have a history of working well with people. So that goes back to kind of the reputation question. But those are the things that will allow you to stay in business when business trends and fundamentals inevitably change.
That's a great place to close it off, and let's thank all of our speakers.